The metallic jingle of my car keys being snatched from my arthritic fingers was the sound that changed everything. One moment I was reaching for them on the kitchen counter, planning my weekly trip to the grocery store, and the next, my nephew. Danny was holding them high above his head like some schoolyard bully. "Are too senile to drive, Aunt Martha." The words hit me harder than the Illinois winter wind that rattled the windows of my small ranch house. Senile. The word hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud, poisoning everything it touched. I stared at Danny's face, 28 years. Old, stubbled, wearing that expression of frustrated authority that reminded me so painfully of his father. My late brother, Harold. "Give me my keys, Danny." My voice came out smaller than I intended, and I hated myself for it. 68 years on this earth, and I was reduced to pleading with a boy I'd helped raise after his mother died. "No, Aunt Martha, I'm serious. Yesterday, you drove to the Piggly Wiggly and couldn't remember where you parked. Mrs. Henderson from next door called me. She said she found you wandering around the parking lot for 20 minutes. Heat flooded my cheeks. 20 minutes. Had it really been that long? I remembered the confusion, the momentary panic when the sea of cars all looked the same but 20 minutes. "I found it eventually," I said, reaching for the keys again. Danny stepped back, and the movement felt like a slap. "Eventually isn't good enough when you're behind the wheel of a 210 weapon. What if you'd forgotten while you were driving? What if you'd gotten confused and hit someone?" The kitchen suddenly felt too small, too bright. The cheerful yellow walls that I'd painted just 3 years ago now seemed to press in on me like the walls of a cage. Through the window above the sink, I could see my 2018 Honda Civic sitting in the driveway, my lifeline to independence. To the world beyond these four walls that were beginning to feel more like a prison with each passing day. I've been driving for 52 years without an accident, I said, my voice gaining strength. 52 years, Danny. I learned to drive in your grandfather's pickup truck on the farm roads outside Galesburg. I've driven through blizzards and tornadoes, and now you're 68 with the beginnings of dementia. The word hit me like a physical blow. Dementia. Not the gentle, almost quaint senile of a moment before, but the clinical, brutal truth that we'd all been dancing around since my diagnosis 6 months ago. Early stages, the doctor had said. Mild cognitive impairment. Lifestyle changes and medication could slow the progression. But Danny made it sound like a death sentence, already carried out. Dr. Peterson said I have years before it becomes serious. I whispered, hating how defensive I sounded. Years of good days. And how many good days do the families of people you might hit have if you get confused behind the wheel? Danny's voice carried that particular brand of righteousness that young people wielded like a sword. How many good days do you have if you kill someone because you forgot which pedal was the brake? I sank into one of the kitchen chairs, the vinyl cushion exhaling with a tired sigh that seemed to echo from somewhere deep in my chest. When had this happened? When had I become the problem to be managed instead of the aunt who'd made Danny's favorite chocolate chip cookies every Sunday for 15 years? When had I become the burden? I need those keys, Danny. I need to go to the store. I'm out of milk and bread, and I'll take you. When? When you can fit me into your schedule between work and your girlfriend and your weekend trips to Chicago? The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. When it's convenient for you. Danny's face softened slightly, and for a moment I saw the little boy who used to climb into my lap and ask me to read him stories about brave knights and clever princesses. Martha, I'm trying to help you. We all are. We, the family. The conspiracy of concerned relatives who'd been having whispered conversations about me for months. I'd seen them at Harold's funeral last year, Danny, his sister, Carol. My sister-in-law, Evelyn, huddled together by the coffee urn, their voices dropping when I approached. I'd thought they were discussing funeral arrangements then. Now I realized. They'd been discussing me. Where are Carol and her husband? Us. Where's Evelyn? If this is such a family decision, where's the rest of the family? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Carol lived in California now, too busy with her own life to visit more than once a year. Evelyn had remarried and moved to Florida. Danny was the only one left, the only one close enough to be burdened with the care and management of aging Aunt Martha. They support this decision, Danny said, and I could hear the rehearsed quality in his voice. They'd discussed it. Probably. In a group text or a conference call. Poor Martha, becoming such a problem. Someone needs to take her keys away before she hurts herself or someone else. I looked around my kitchen, really looked at it for the first time in months. The coffee maker I'd owned for 15 years. Its plastic slightly yellowed but still faithfully brewing my morning cup. The refrigerator covered with photos of family members, most of whom barely called anymore. The small herb garden on the windowsill that I tended each morning, talking to the basil and oregano like old friends. This was my domain, my sanctuary. And now even it felt invaded. What's next? I asked quietly. Are you going to tell me I can't live alone anymore? That I need to go to one of those places with the locked doors and the smell of industrial disinfectant? Nobody's talking about that, Danny said, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. Yet I finished for him. Nobody's talking about that yet. Silence stretched between us, filled only by the steady tick of the wall clock that had been keeping time in this kitchen since I bought the house 35 years ago. 35 years of independence, of making my own decisions, of being responsible for myself and no one else. All of it dissolving because I'd spent 20 minutes looking for my car in a parking lot. I'll make you a deal, Danny said finally, his voice gentler now. Let me drive you to your appointments, to the store, wherever you need to go for the next month. If you can show me that the confusion isn't getting worse, we can talk about giving you the keys back. A month. 30 days of asking permission to leave my own house. 30 days of waiting for someone else to decide. When I could buy groceries or visit the library or just drive around the block to feel the illusion of freedom. I wanted to tell him to go to hell, wanted to snatch those keys and storm out of my own kitchen, but the fight had gone out of me as quickly as it had arrived. Fine, I said, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. Danny looked relieved, as if he'd expected more of a battle. He should have. The Martha Henley of even 5 years ago would have given him a fight he'd never forget. But that Martha hadn't been diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment. That Martha hadn't spent the last 6 months questioning every misplaced word, every forgotten name, every moment of confusion that might be normal aging or might be the first step toward losing herself entirely. "Come by tomorrow morning," Danny said, tucking my keys into his pocket with a casual gesture that felt like the final nail in the coffin of my independence. "We can go to the grocery store together." After he left, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, watching the shadows lengthen across the linoleum floor. The house felt different somehow, smaller and more fragile, as if removing my car keys had somehow removed its foundation as well. I could hear Mrs. Henderson's television through the thin walls that separated our driveways. The canned laughter of some sitcom mocking my situation. I thought about calling someone Carol. Maybe, or my old friend Janet from church, but what would I say? That my nephew had taken my keys away like I was a child who couldn't be trusted with sharp objects. That I was officially too senile to function in the world without supervision. The shame of it settled over me like a heavy blanket, suffocating and warm. Instead, I made myself a cup of tea and tried to read the newspaper, but the words seemed to swim on the page. Not because of my condition I'd always needed reading glasses, but because of the tears I was too proud to let fall. Folded the paper carefully and placed it back on the kitchen table, then walked to the window to look at my car. It sat there like a faithful dog waiting for its owner to return. The afternoon sun glinting off its navy blue paint. I'd bought it 3 years. I'd go after my old Corolla finally gave up the ghost, and I'd been so proud of it. My first car with Bluetooth and a backup camera. My first car with payments I could easily afford thanks to Harold's life insurance policy that had been more generous than anyone expected. Now it was just an expensive lawn ornament, a K-monument, to my former independence. The first week passed in a blur of scheduled humiliation. Danny arrived every Tuesday and Thursday morning at 9 o'clock sharp, his face carefully neutral as he asked what I needed from the store. He drove my car while I sat in the passenger seat like a child being chauffeured to school. He meant well. I could see that in the way he helped me carry groceries, in the way he made sure I had everything I needed before we left each store. But meaning well didn't make it any less devastating. The worst part was how everyone else treated the situation as perfectly normal. The cashier at Piggly Wiggly smiled at Danny and made small talk about the weather while I stood beside him like a piece of luggage. The pharmacist handed my medications directly to Danny, as if I'd suddenly become incapable of managing my own prescriptions. Even Mrs. Henderson, when she waved at us from her garden, directed her greeting to Danny rather than me. I was disappearing, becoming invisible in my own life. On the second Thursday, while Danny was loading groceries into the trunk, I made a decision that surprised even me. Instead of getting into the passenger seat, I walked over to the bus stop across the street from the Piggly Wiggly and studied the route map posted there. I hadn't ridden a bus in probably 20 years, but there it was, Route 7. Running from downtown all the way out to Riverside Mall, with stops at the library, the pharmacy, and 3 different grocery stores. "Aunt Martha, what are you doing?" Danny called from beside the car. Learning about the bus system, I called back, copying the schedule onto a piece of paper I'd found in my purse. Danny looked confused, as if the idea of me using public transportation was as foreign as me sprouting wings and flying. And maybe it was. I'd driven everywhere for so long that I'd forgotten there were other ways to get around. other ways to maintain some small measure of independence. That afternoon, after Danny had dutifully driven me home and helped me put away the groceries, I called the city's transportation department and asked about senior bus passes. The woman on the phone was kind and patient, explaining that I could get a discounted monthly pass for $25 and that the buses ran every 30 minutes during peak hours. It wasn't driving, but it was movement. It was choice. I didn't tell Danny about the bus pass when he came by the following Tuesday. Instead, I let him drive me to my doctor's appointment and listened to him discuss my condition with Dr. Peterson as if I weren't sitting right there in the examination room. "How has she been doing with the new medication?" Danny asked, and I wanted to scream that she was perfectly capable of answering questions about her own health. "The donepezil seems to be helping with some of the cognitive symptoms," Dr. Peterson replied, directing his answer to Danny rather than me. "We're not seeing any significant progression at this point, but the driving," Danny pressed. "You still think that's not safe?" Dr. Peterson looked uncomfortable, glancing between Danny and me. "I think Mrs. Henley is capable of making her own decisions about driving at this stage. The mild cognitive impairment she's experiencing doesn't necessarily impair her judgment or reflexes behind the wheel." I felt a surge of vindication, but Danny wasn't finished. "What about the confusion? The getting lost in parking lots? That could happen to anyone," Dr. Peterson said gently. "Parking lots are designed to be confusing. I've gotten lost in parking lots myself." But Danny had made up his mind, and no amount of medical opinion was going to change it. On the way home, he lectured me about being realistic about my limitations, about accepting help when it was offered, about thinking of others instead of just myself. "I am thinking of others," I finally said as we pulled into my driveway. "I'm thinking about how much easier it would be for you if you didn't have to chauffeur me around twice a week. That's not what this is about, isn't it?" I turned to face him in the driver's seat of my own car. "Isn't this about making your life easier? About managing the problem of Aunt Martha before she becomes too much trouble?" Danny's face flushed red. "That's not fair." Fair. The word came out louder than I intended. "What's fair about treating me like I'm already incompetent? What's fair about making decisions about my life without consulting me? What's fair about taking away the one thing that lets me maintain some dignity?" "Driving isn't about dignity," Danny said. "It's about safety." "For who? For me or for you? For your peace of mind." I fumbled with the door handle, suddenly desperate to get out of the car, to get away from this conversation that was making me feel smaller with every word. "You know what isn't safe, Danny? Isolation, depression, having nothing to live for because everyone treats you like you're already dead." I managed to get the door open and stumbled out, my arthritis making the movement awkward and painful. Danny called after me, but I didn't turn around. I walked into my house and locked the door behind me, then stood in the hallway listening to my car start up and drive away. He was taking it with him now, not even pretending anymore that it was still mine. That night, I called Carol in California. It was late there, but she answered on the third ring, her voice thick with sleep. "Aunt Martha, is everything okay?" "Danny took my car keys," I said, without preamble. There was a long pause. "We talked about this. We all agreed it was probably for the best. There it was again. The family tribunal that had decided my fate without consulting me. Did you know that Dr. Peterson says I'm still capable of making my own decisions about driving? Another pause. Danny said the doctor was concerned about your safety. Danny heard what he wanted to hear. I sank into my recliner, the one Harold had given me for my 60th birthday. Carol, I need you to understand something. I'm not asking to drive cross-country or navigate downtown Chicago in rush hour. I just want to be able to go to the grocery store without asking permission. I know this is hard, Carol said, and I could hear her sitting up in bed, probably waking up her husband. But we're worried about you. We love you. Love, the word that justified every indignity, every loss of autonomy. We love you, so we're going to treat you like a child. We love you, so we're going to make decisions for you. We love you, so we're going to strip away everything that makes you feel human. If you love me, I said quietly, trust me to know my own limitations. Martha, Carol's voice was gentle but firm. You're not seeing this clearly. The confusion, the memory issues, they're getting worse. According to who? According to Danny, who sees me twice a week for an hour at a time. According to you, who talks to me once a month. The anger was building again, hot and righteous. I live with myself every day, Carol. I know when I'm confused and when I'm not. I know when I feel safe and when I don't. But what if you don't know? Carol asked. What if the disease is affecting your judgment about your own judgment? It was the question that haunted my sleepless nights, the fear that lurked beneath every moment of uncertainty. What if I couldn't trust my own mind anymore? What if the very organ I relied on to make decisions was the one that was failing me? Then I guess I'll find out, I said. But I'd rather find out by living my life than by sitting in this house waiting to die. After I hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time, thinking about trust and love and the fine line between protection and imprisonment. Outside, I could hear the occasional car passing by, their headlights briefly illuminating my living room walls before disappearing into the darkness. The next morning, I walked to the bus stop. It was a longer walk than I'd expected, nearly half a mile from my house to the main road where Route 7 made its stop. My knees complained with every step, and by the time I reached the small shelter, I was breathing harder than I liked. But I was there, and when the bus arrived 15 minutes later, I climbed aboard with my senior pass and a sense of accomplishment I hadn't felt in months. The bus driver was a woman about my age with silver hair and kind eyes. "First time riding with us?" she asked, as I fumbled with the pass scanner. "In about 20 years," I admitted. "Well, welcome back. I'm Louise. I drive this route Monday through Friday, so you'll probably see me again." Louise. A name, a person. A human connection that wasn't filtered through Danny's protective oversight. I found a seat near the front and watched the familiar streets of my neighborhood roll by through the scratched bus windows. Everything looked different from this perspective, smaller somehow, but also more detailed. I noticed things I'd missed. While driving, the way Mrs. Patterson had painted her fence bright blue. The new flower garden in front of the Methodist church. The for sale sign in the yard of the house where the Kowalski family had lived for 30 years. The bus made several stops, picking up other passengers, mostly elderly people like me, a few young mothers with strollers, workers heading to jobs that didn't start until mid-morning. No one stared at me or whispered about my competency. Just another passenger, anonymous and equal. When we reached the downtown library, I got off with a feeling of triumph that was probably disproportionate to the achievement, but I didn't care. I had traveled independently. I had made a choice about where to go and when. And I had executed that choice without asking anyone's permission. The library was quiet and welcoming, smelling of books and coffee from the small cafe in the corner. I browsed the mystery section and checked out 3 novels, then spent an hour reading newspapers in the periodical section. When I was ready to leave, I walked to the bus stop and waited for Louise to bring Route 7 back around. What was your visit? Louise asked as I climbed aboard for the return trip. Perfect, I said, and meant it. Danny called that evening to check on me, as he'd been doing every day since taking my keys. How are you feeling today, Aunt Martha? Fine, I said, not mentioning my adventure. I read a good book and did some cleaning. That's good. I was thinking we could go to the pharmacy tomorrow morning. You're running low on your blood pressure medication? Actually, I took care of that today, I said, which was true. The pharmacy was 2 blocks from the library, and I'd walked there. After my bus ride, you walked to the pharmacy. Danny's voice was sharp with concern. Aunt Martha, that's a long walk for you. It's 6 blocks. I've been walking 6 blocks since I was 6 years old. But your knees, my knees, are fine for 6 blocks. I settled back in my recliner, enjoying the novel sensation of being the one with information instead of the one being informed about. The pharmacist was very helpful. We talked about the timing of my medications, and he suggested I might want to talk to Dr. Peterson about adjusting the dosage on my cholesterol medicine. Danny was quiet for a moment. I could practically hear him processing this information, trying to figure out how I'd manage to conduct my own business without his supervision. Well, that's good, he said finally. But next time, please, call me. I can drive you. I know you can, I said gently. But I don't need you to drive me everywhere, Danny. I appreciate your concern, but I'm not helpless. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea and one of the library books, feeling more like myself than I had in weeks. The book was a cozy mystery set in a small English village, full of quirky characters and gentle humor. The kind of book I'd always loved but had somehow stopped reading since my diagnosis. As if enjoying fiction was somehow inappropriate for someone with cognitive impairment. But tonight, reading felt like an act of rebellion, a declaration that I was still Martha Henley. Still a woman with interests and opinions and the right to spend her evening however she chose. Over the next 2 weeks, I established a routine. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I took the bus to various destinations around town: the library, the grocery store, the small park by the river where I liked to sit and watch the ducks. I discovered that the bus system was more extensive than I'd realized, connecting not just the major shopping areas but also the senior center, the community college, and the hospital where I went for my monthly check-ups. Each trip was a small victory, cue of competence that I carried home like a secret treasure. I learned the schedules, the routes, the names of the regular drivers. I made acquaintances with other frequent passengers, Mrs. Chen, who rode to the senior center for Tai Chi classes. Robert, a retired teacher who volunteered at the animal shelter. Sandra, a young mother who worked part-time at the city library. These were relationships based on nothing more than shared transportation, but they felt more genuine than the careful, protective interactions I had with my family. Oh, no one on the bus treated me like I was fragile or incompetent. No one monitored my conversations for signs of confusion or made decisions about what was best for me. Denny continued his twice-weekly chauffeur service. And I let him, partly because I didn't want to hurt his feelings, and partly because it was easier than explaining my new independence. But the dynamic had shifted. When he asked what I needed from the store, I often replied that I'd already taken care of it. When he offered to drive me to appointments, I thanked him but explained that I'd already made other arrangements. What other arrangements? He asked one Thursday afternoon as we sat in my living room after returning from what had become our weekly grocery run. I take the bus sometimes, I said casually, as if it were no big deal. Danny's face went through several expressions: surprise, concern, and something that looked almost like betrayal. Aunt Martha, that's not safe. What if you get confused? What if you get on the wrong bus or get lost? Then I'll figure it out, I said. The same way I've been figuring things out for 68 years. But you're not the same person you were even a year ago, Danny said, and there was a note of desperation in his voice that made me look at him more closely. The disease is progressing. You have to accept that. Disease. Not condition, not impairment, but disease. As if I were actively dying, as if every day brought me closer to complete incapacity. Dr. Peterson says the progression is very slow, I said carefully. He says I could have years of good functioning. But what if he's wrong? What if something happens to you while you're out there alone? Danny's voice cracked slightly. I can't lose you too, Aunt Martha. Not after Dad. And there it was. The truth beneath all the concern and protective hovering. Danny wasn't just worried about my safety. He was terrified of losing another family member. Harold's sudden heart attack had shattered him, and now he was trying to control every variable in my life to prevent another loss he couldn't handle. I reached over and took his hand, feeling how young it was, how smooth compared to my own weathered fingers. Danny, sweetheart, you can't protect me from everything. You can't protect anyone from everything. Your father's death wasn't your fault, and whatever happens to me won't be your fault either. But I should be taking care of you, Danny said. And I could see the little boy in his face. The child who'd cried at his father's funeral and promised to look after everyone who was left. You are taking care of me, I said. But taking care of someone doesn't mean controlling their life. It means supporting them while they live it. Danny pulled his hand away and stood up, pacing to the window where he could see my car sitting in the driveway. I just think you should be more careful, more realistic about your limitations. And I think you should be more realistic about my capabilities. We stared at each other across the living room that had witnessed so many family gatherings, so many Christmas mornings and birthday celebrations and quiet Sunday afternoons. I could see the stubbornness in Danny's face that reminded me so much of Harold. The same determination that had made my brother successful in business, but sometimes difficult to live with. "I'm keeping the keys," Danny said finally. No," I replied. But that didn't mean I was going to stop living. The confrontation I'd been dreading came on a rainy Tuesday in October. I was waiting at the bus stop, huddled under the small shelter with my umbrella and a grocery list, when Danny's truck pulled up to the curb with a screech of brakes that made the other waiting passengers look up in alarm. He got out of the truck and walked over to me with the measured steps of someone trying very hard to control their temper. "Mrs. Chen called me," he said without preamble. "She said she's been seeing you on the bus every week." Mrs. Chen, my Tai Chi acquaintance who had seemed so friendly, so understanding. Apparently, she was also part of the neighborhood watch system that monitored the activities of potentially incompetent elderly residents. "Mrs. Chen needs to mind her own business," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. The betrayal stung more. Then I wanted to admit, "She's worried about you." "We all are." Danny looked around at the other people waiting for the bus, an elderly man with a walker, a middle-aged woman in a hospital uniform, two teenagers with backpacks. "This isn't safe, Aunt Martha. You could get confused, get on the wrong bus, end up anywhere." "I've been taking the bus for 3 weeks without getting confused or lost," I said, hating how defensive I sounded. "I'm perfectly capable of. Are you?" Danny's voice rose, and the other passengers began to move away from us, sensing the family drama unfolding. "Because yesterday you called me and asked why your car wasn't in the driveway? You'd forgotten that I have your keys." The words hit me like a physical blow because they were true. I had called him, confused and momentarily panicked when I looked out the window and didn't see my car. It had only lasted a few minutes. The memory had returned as soon as I heard Danny's voice, but it had happened. "Everyone forgets things," I said weakly. "Not everyone has dementia." The word hung in the air like a curse. Around us, the other bus passengers pretended not to listen while clearly hanging on every word. I felt exposed, humiliated, as if my private struggles were being broadcast for public entertainment. "Get in the truck," Danny said, his voice gentler now but no less firm. "I'll drive you wherever you need to go." The bus was approaching, its familiar bulk and the promise of anonymous independence it represented. I could see Louise behind the wheel, and she raised her hand in a small wave when she recognized me. In a few moments, I could be on that bus, away from this confrontation, away from Danny's worried face and protective hovering. Instead, I closed my umbrella and walked to Danny's truck. The ride to the grocery store was silent except for the sound of rain against the windshield and the occasional squeak of the wipers. Danny's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, and I could see the tension in his shoulders. The way he kept glancing at me as if I might disappear if he looked away. Inside the store, he pushed the cart while I selected items from my list. But the familiar routine felt different now, tainted by the scene at the bus stop. Other shoppers looked at us with expressions that ranged from sympathy to curiosity. And I wondered how many of them had witnessed elderly relatives being slowly stripped of their independence in the name of love and safety. At the pharmacy counter, Danny spoke directly to the pharmacist about my medications while I stood beside him like a piece of luggage. "She's been having some memory issues," he explained in a low voice that wasn't quite low enough. I want to make sure she's taking everything correctly. Oh, I've been managing my own medications for 50 years, I said. But neither Danny nor the pharmacist seemed to hear me. When we got back to my house, Danny helped me carry the groceries inside and then sat down at my kitchen table without being invited. We need to talk, he said. I put away the milk and bread, moving slowly to give myself time to think. Outside, the rain had intensified, turning the world gray and blurry beyond the kitchen windows. It matched my mood perfectly. I know you think I'm being overprotective, Danny began, but I'm scared, Aunt Martha. I'm scared that something's going to happen to you, and I won't be there to help. Something's going to happen to me, eventually, I said, turning to face him. That's the nature of being human. We age, we decline, we die. You can't prevent that by locking me in this house. I'm not locking you anywhere. I'm just trying to keep you safe. Safe from what? From living, from making my own choices, from maintaining some dignity while I still can. The anger was building again, hot and righteous. Do you know what it's like to have everyone treat you like you're already gone? To have your own nephew discuss your medical care with strangers while you're standing right there? Danny's face flushed. I'm sorry about that. You were just taking over my life because you've decided I'm not competent to manage it myself. The doctor said I have mild cognitive impairment that may or may not progress significantly. You've decided that means I'm helpless. Danny was quiet for a moment, staring at his hands folded on my kitchen table. When he looked up, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. I watched my dad die, Aunt Martha. I watched him go from being the strongest man I knew to being gone in a matter of hours. I can't watch you disappear slowly, piece by piece, especially if there's something I can do to prevent it. You can't prevent it, I said softly. You can't prevent any of it. But you can choose whether to help me live what time I have left or spend it trying to protect me from life itself. What if you get hurt? What if you get confused and can't find your way home? Then I'll deal with it. I won't. And that will be part of my story too. I sat down across from him, reaching for his hands across the table. Danny, I know you love me. I know you're trying to help. But I need you to understand something. Taking away my independence isn't protecting me. It's killing me a little bit every day. Danny pulled his hands away and stood up, pacing to the window that looked out onto my small backyard. I can't give you the keys back, he said finally. I just can't. What if something happens? What if something happens while I'm sitting in this house, isolated and depressed? What if I die of loneliness before the dementia has a chance to kill me? That's not going to happen, isn't it? I joined him at the window, looking out at the bird feeder I'd installed last spring. It was empty now, abandoned since I'd stopped being able to drive to the store for birdseed whenever I wanted. When was the last time I had dinner with friends? When was the last time I went to a movie or browsed in a bookstore, or did anything spontaneous? Danny didn't answer because we both knew the answer. Since my diagnosis, my world had shrunk too. The boundaries of this house and the destinations Danny deemed necessary and safe. I'm not asking to drive cross-country, I said quietly. I'm not asking to drive at night or in bad weather or when I'm feeling confused. I'm asking for the right to drive to the grocery store on a Tuesday afternoon when I feel capable and alert. Do I know when you feel capable? How do I know you won't think you're fine when you're actually having a bad day? It was a fair question, and one I'd asked myself many times. How could I trust my own judgment when the very organ I relied on for judgment was potentially compromised? Maybe you don't know, I admitted. Maybe I don't know either. But maybe that's a risk worth taking for the chance to feel human again. Danny turned away from the window, his face set in lines of stubborn determination that reminded me painfully of Harold. I'm sorry, Aunt Martha. I know this is hard, but I can't take that risk. I won't be responsible for someone getting hurt because I gave you back the keys. After he left, I sat in my kitchen and cried for the first time since my diagnosis. Not the gentle tears of grief or nostalgia, but the harsh, ugly sobs of someone who has lost something precious and irreplaceable. I cried for my independence, for my dignity, for the woman I had been before everyone decided she was too broken to function in the world. When the tears finally stopped, I felt empty but somehow clearer, as if the crying had washed away the last of my illusions about the situation. Danny wasn't going to change his mind. Carol and Evelyn weren't going to intervene on my behalf. The family had made their decision, and I was going to have to live with it. Or find another way to live. That evening, I called a taxi. The driver was a young man named Marcus, with kind eyes and a patient manner. He didn't ask questions when I gave him the address of the Honda dealership on the other side of town, and he waited in the parking lot while I went inside to speak with a salesman about trading in my car. You want to trade in a 2018 Civic with only 30,000 miles? The salesman, whose name tag read Kevin, looked at me with barely concealed confusion. Ma'am, that's a great car. Why would you want to get rid of it? I can't drive it anymore, I said simply, and I need the money. Kevin's expression softened with understanding. Health issues, something like that? He was kind and professional, walking me through the process of selling my car without making me feel foolish or incompetent. The paperwork took an hour, and when it was finished, I had a check for $18,000 and no longer owned the vehicle that had represented my independence. Marcus drove me home, and I asked him to wait while I went inside to get my checkbook. When I came back out, I wrote him a check for $500. Ma'am, the fare was only $35, Marcus said, staring at the check. The extra is a retainer, I said. I'm going to need rides sometimes, and I want to know I can call you? Is that acceptable? Marcus looked at the check again, then at me. Yes, ma'am. That's more than acceptable. I gave him my phone number and took his business card. Another small piece of independence reclaimed. The next morning, Danny called while I was having breakfast. I drove by your house last night, and your car wasn't in the driveway. Where is it? I sold it. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. You what? I sold it. To the Honda dealership on Maple Street. Got a good price for it, too. Aunt Martha, you can't just sell your car without discussing it with the family. I can sell my own property whenever I want, I said, calmly spooning sugar into my coffee. It's still a free country, and I still own my own possessions. But what if you need it? What if we decide you can drive again? Then I'll buy another car. But right now, it was just sitting in my driveway depreciating while you held the keys hostage. Danny was quiet for so long that I thought he might have hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice was strained. This isn't like you, Aunt Martha. This impulsiveness, this ... rebellion. Maybe we should talk to Dr. Peterson about adjusting your medications. Maybe you should stop trying to medicate away my personality. I said and hung up. An hour later, Carol called from California. Danny says you sold your car. Danny says a lot of things. Martha, this doesn't sound like you. You loved that car. I loved driving that car. Since I'm not allowed to drive it, I decided to sell it and use the money for something more useful. Like, what? I looked around my kitchen at the walls that had been closing in on me for months, at the window that looked out onto the empty driveway where my Honda used to sit. Like freedom. I don't understand. I know you don't. None of you do. You all think that because I have early-stage dementia, I've lost the right to make decisions about my own life. But I'm still here, Carol. I'm still Martha. And I'm tired of being treated like I've already disappeared. Over the next few weeks, I began to restructure my life around my new reality. I used Marcus's taxi service twice a week for grocery shopping and errands that were too far for the bus system. I established accounts with delivery services for heavier items. I hired a teenager from the neighborhood to help with yard work and minor household repairs. Each arrangement was a small declaration of independence, a proof that I could adapt and overcome without surrendering my autonomy. The money from selling the car made it all possible, transforming what had been a symbol of my lost freedom into the means of creating new kinds of freedom. Danny continued his twice-weekly visits. But the dynamic had shifted again. Now he was the one who seemed uncertain, off balance. He would arrive expecting to find me helpless and dependent, only to discover that I had already handled whatever he had come to help with. You hired someone to clean your gutters? He asked. One Thursday, staring up at my house, Tommy Rodriguez from down the street. He's saving money for college, and I needed the gutters cleaned before winter. You should have called me. I would have done it for free. When? When you could fit it into your schedule between work and monitoring my competency. Danny flinched as if I'd slapped him. That's not fair. Neither is assuming I can't manage my own household maintenance. We were standing in my driveway, the space where my car used to sit, now occupied by nothing but fallen leaves and the fading outline of tire marks on the concrete. Danny kept looking at that empty space as if he expected the Honda to materialize. Through sheer force of will. I miss it too, I said quietly. I miss driving to the lake on Sunday afternoons. I miss being able to leave the house whenever I wanted without asking permission or scheduling transportation. But I made a choice. To adapt instead of sitting here feeling sorry for myself. You shouldn't have had to make that choice, Danny said, and for the first time in months. He sounded more sad than stubborn. No, I shouldn't have. But you made it for me when you decided I was too incompetent to be trusted with my own car keys. We went inside and had coffee at my kitchen table. The same table where this had all started with the jingle of keys being snatched from my fingers. But something was different now. Danny seemed smaller somehow, less certain of his righteousness. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began hesitantly, "about taking away your independence. And, and maybe I've been more worried about my own feelings than yours." It was the closest thing to an apology I was likely to get, and I decided to accept it in the spirit it was offered. "We've all been scared, Danny. This isn't easy for any of us." "But it's hardest for you," he said, looking directly at me for the first time in weeks. "And I made it harder by treating you like you were already gone." I reached across the table and took his hand, feeling the calluses from his construction work, the strength in his fingers that reminded me so much of Harold's hands. "I'm not gone yet. I may never be completely gone, even if the disease progresses. But even if I am someday, I'd rather spend whatever time I have left living as myself instead of as everyone's idea of who I should be for my own safety." Danny was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing patterns on the back of my hand. "What if we tried something different?" he said finally. "Like what? Like, what if I gave you back your keys, but we agreed on some conditions? Times when you wouldn't drive, situations you'd avoid." My heart jumped, but I tried to keep my voice steady. "I sold the car, remember? We could find you another one. Something smaller, maybe? Easier to handle." I pulled my hand back and studied his face, looking for signs that this was another attempt to manage and control me. But all I saw was uncertainty and what might have been hope. "What kind of conditions?" I asked carefully. "No driving at night. No driving in bad weather. Maybe. Maybe we could set up a system where you let me know when you're going out, just so someone knows where you are." It wasn't everything I wanted, but it was more than I dared to hope for in months. "What changed your mind?" Danny was quiet for so long that I thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I drove by Mrs. Patterson's house yesterday. She's 93 and still drives herself to church every Sunday. And I thought about how I'd feel if someone took away her keys because they decided she was too old to be trusted. And then I thought about how I'd feel if I was 93 and my nephew decided I was too senile to make my own decisions. And I realized I'd be furious. I'd fight like hell to keep my independence, even if it meant taking risks." He looked up at me, and I could see Harold in his eyes, the stubborn determination that ran in our family like a genetic trait. "I think you've been fighting like hell, and I've been too scared to see it." That afternoon, we drove to 3 different used car lots in Danny's truck. At the second one, we found a 5-year-old Toyota Corolla with low mileage and an excellent service record. It was smaller than my Honda had been, easier to park and maneuver, but it had all the modern safety features I'd grown accustomed to. "The backup camera is really good on these," the salesman explained, demonstrating the system. "And the collision avoidance system will help prevent accidents if you have any moments of distraction." He was trying to be tactful, but we all knew what he meant. If I got confused? If my aging brain failed me at a crucial moment? It should have been insulting, but instead it felt like a reasonable accommodation, a technological safety net that might give both Danny and me some peace of mind. I wrote a check for the down payment and arranged financing for the rest. When the paperwork was finished, Danny handed me the keys with a ceremony that felt almost religious in its significance. "There are conditions," he said, echoing our earlier conversation. "I know. And if you start having more frequent episodes of confusion, we'll deal with that when it happens." Danny nodded, but I could see the worry in his eyes, the fear that he was making a terrible mistake. "Maybe we should start small, just around the neighborhood at first." "Danny," I said gently, "I'm not 16 years old getting my first license. I've been driving for 52 years. I think I can handle driving to the grocery store." That evening, I sat in my new car in my driveway for 20 minutes before starting the engine. It smelled like the vanilla air freshener the previous owner had favored, and the seat was adjusted for someone much taller than me, but it was mine. My key in the ignition, my hands on the steering wheel, my choice about where to go and when. I drove to the lake. It was the same route I'd taken hundreds of times over the years, winding through residential neighborhoods and past the high school where Danny had played football. Then out onto the county road that led to Riverside Park. The late afternoon sun was slanting through the trees, turning the autumn leaves into a canopy of gold and red above the narrow road. I parked in the small gravel lot overlooking the water and turned off the engine. The lake was calm, reflecting the sky like a mirror, and a few ducks paddled near the shore, probably hoping for breadcrumbs from visitors who had already gone home for the day. This was where Harold and I had come as children, back when our parents would pack picnic lunches and spend entire Sundays by the water. This was where I'd brought Danny and Carol when they were small, teaching them to skip stones and identify different types of birds. This was where I'd come alone after Harold's funeral, trying to make sense of a world that suddenly felt much too empty. Now I was here again, not as someone's burden or responsibility, but as myself. Martha Henley, 68 years old, early stage dementia, still capable of making her own decisions and living her own life. I rolled down the windows and listened to the sound of water lapping against the shore, the distant call of a red-winged blackbird, the rustle of leaves in the gentle evening breeze. Somewhere behind me, I could hear children playing in the park's playground, their voices carrying across the water like music. I thought about the last few months, about the fear and anger and humiliation I'd felt as my family slowly stripped away my independence in the name of love and safety. I thought about Danny's good intentions and my own stubborn pride, about the fine line between protection and imprisonment, between caring for someone and controlling them. Most of all, I thought about the future. There would likely come a time when I couldn't drive safely, when the confusion and memory loss would progress to the point where Danny's fears would be justified. But that time wasn't now, and when it came, I hoped I would have the wisdom to recognize it and the grace to accept help without losing myself entirely. For now, though, I was here. I was driving. I was free. The sun was setting behind the trees when I finally started the car and began the drive home. The familiar streets looked different in the golden light of evening, softer somehow, more forgiving. I drove slowly, carefully, hyper-aware of every stop sign and traffic light, every pedestrian and cyclist who shared the road with me. When I pulled into my driveway, Danny's truck was parked on the street in front of my house. He was sitting on my front porch, his cell phone in his hand, and when he saw me, the relief on his face was so profound that I felt a pang of guilt for not calling to let him know where I was going. "I was worried," he said as I walked up the porch steps. "I know. I should have called. Where did you go?" "The lake. I wanted to watch the sunset." Danny nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. He'd spent enough summer evenings at that same lake to know why I'd chosen it for my first independent drive in months. "How did it feel?" he asked. "Like coming back to life." I said honestly. We sat on the porch in comfortable silence as the last light faded from the sky and the streetlights began to flicker on throughout the neighborhood. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the evening news beginning on Mrs. Henderson's television. The familiar cadence of the local anchor's voice carrying through her open windows. "I'm sorry," Danny said suddenly, "for all of it, for taking your keys, for treating you like you were already gone, for making you feel like you had to sell your car to prove a point." "You were scared," I said. "We were all scared. That's not an excuse." "No, but it's an explanation. And sometimes that's enough." Danny looked at me in the dim light from the street lamp, and I could see the little boy he'd been. The teenager who'd struggled with his father's expectations. The young man who'd taken on too much responsibility too soon. "I don't want to lose you," he said quietly. "You're not going to lose me," I replied. "I may change. I may need more help as time goes on, but I'm not going anywhere. This is still me, Danny. This is still your Aunt Martha who taught you to make chocolate chip cookies and helped you with your homework and listened to you complain about girls when you were 15. But what if the disease progresses faster than we expect? What if I have an accident? What if I make a mistake that hurts someone?" I reached over and took his hand. "Then we'll deal with it together, but we can't live our lives in fear of what might happen." "The conditions still stand," Danny said, but his voice was gentler now. "No night driving, no bad weather, and you have to let me know when you're going out." "Agreed." And Danny, "Yeah, thank you for giving me back my keys, for trusting me to know my own limitations. Thank you for not giving up on me when I was being an overprotective ass." I laughed, surprised by the sound of my own laughter after so many weeks of tension and sadness. "Language, young man." "Sorry, Aunt Martha." "Thank you for not giving up on me when I was being an overprotective donkey. That's better." We sat on the porch until the mosquitoes drove us inside, then had dinner together at my kitchen table. Danny told me about his work, about the house he was building for a young couple with their first baby, about his girlfriend Sarah and her job at the veterinary clinic. Normal conversation, the kind we used to have before my diagnosis turned every interaction into a medical consultation. After he left, I stood in my kitchen looking out at my new car in the driveway. It wasn't the same as my Honda, but it was mine, and tomorrow I could drive it wherever I wanted to go. The grocery store, the library, the lake, or just around the block for the simple pleasure of being in motion, of choosing my own direction. I thought about calling Carol to tell her about the new car, about Danny's change of heart, about the small victory I'd won in the ongoing battle to remain myself despite my diagnosis. But it was late in California, and besides, this felt like something that belonged to Danny and me. A private reconciliation that didn't need to be shared or explained to the rest of the family. Instead, I made myself a cup of tea and sat in my living room with one of the library books I'd checked out during my bus riding phase. It was still a cozy mystery, still set in that same English village, but now it felt different somehow. The elderly amateur detective who solved crimes through careful observation and logical deduction no longer seemed like an impossible fantasy, but like a reflection of my own capabilities, my own right to remain engaged with the world despite my age and diagnosis. Outside, I could hear the occasional car passing by, their headlights briefly illuminating my living room walls before disappearing into the darkness. But now I knew that tomorrow, if I chose, I could be one of those cars. One of those lights moving through the darkness toward whatever destination I decided was worth visiting. The next morning, I drove to the grocery store, then to the library, then to the senior center, where I signed up for a watercolor painting class that met twice a week. Each trip was a small celebration, a quiet assertion of my continued right to exist in the world as an autonomous person, rather than a problem to be managed. At the pharmacy, I picked up my prescriptions myself, discussing the timing and side effects directly with the pharmacist without Danny as an intermediary. At the bank, I deposited the remainder of the check from selling my Honda and opened a small savings account earmarked for independence expenses, taxi rides when I didn't feel safe driving, delivery fees for groceries during bad weather, anything. That helped me maintain my autonomy without compromising my safety. Each transaction was routine, mundane, the kind of everyday business that healthy people took for granted. But for me, they were victories. Proof that I was still capable of managing my own affairs despite the shadows that occasionally clouded my memory. The watercolor class was a revelation. I hadn't painted since high school, and my first attempts were clumsy and frustrating. But the teacher, a retired art professor named Helen Morrison, was patient and encouraging. And the other students, all seniors dealing with their own various challenges, created an atmosphere of mutual support rather than competition. The secret to watercolor, Helen told us during the second class, is learning to work with the accidents. The paint will do things you don't expect, flow in directions you didn't plan. You can fight it and make a mess, or you can learn to see the beauty in the unexpected. It seemed like a metaphor for something larger than painting, though I couldn't quite put my finger on what. I thought about it on the drive home, about learning to work with accidents, about finding beauty in the unexpected, about adapting to changes in your life that you never planned for or wanted. That evening, Danny called to check on me, as he'd been doing every night since returning my keys. "How was your day?" he asked. "I went to a painting class," I said, surprised by how normal it sounded, how much like the old Martha I felt. "Painting? I didn't know you were interested in art." I wasn't sure I was either, but it turns out I like it. I'm not very good at it yet, but I like the process of learning something new. "That's great, Aunt Martha. Really great." Oh, there was something in his voice, a relief or happiness that made me realize how much my months of depression and isolation had affected him too. He'd been watching me disappear just as much as I'd been feeling myself fade away. "Danny," I said impulsively, "would you like to see what I painted today?" "Absolutely. Come over for dinner tomorrow night. I'll cook your favorite pot roast, and I'll show you my masterpiece. Fair warning, though it looks more like a muddy puddle than a landscape. Danny laughed, the first genuine laughter I'd heard from him in months. I'd love to see your muddy puddle landscape. After we hung up, I went to my bedroom and looked at myself in the full-length mirror that had been hanging there for 30 years. Same gray hair, same lined face, same blue eyes that Harold had always said reminded him of our mothers. But something was different. Something in my posture or expression that spoke of a person who was still engaged with life rather than simply enduring it. I was still Martha Henley. I still had early-stage dementia. I still faced an uncertain future, filled with potential losses and limitations I couldn't yet imagine. But I also still had the right to make choices about how I lived whatever time remained to me, and people who loved me enough to support those choices even when they were afraid. It wasn't everything I'd lost, but it was enough to build on. It was enough to call hope. The months that followed weren't without challenges. There were days when I felt confused or disoriented, days when I chose not to drive because something didn't feel right. There were times when I got lost in familiar places, when names escaped me or conversations became difficult to follow. On those days, I called Danny or took the bus or simply stayed home and painted watercolors that looked more like muddy puddles than recognizable objects. But there were also good days. Days when I drove to the lake and sat by the water watching the seasons change. Days when I met friends for lunch or browsed in bookstores or simply went to the grocery store because I wanted fresh peaches or a particular brand of tea. Days when I felt like myself, like the woman I'd always been, rather than the disease that was slowly, imperfectly trying to claim me. The key, and I use that word deliberately, was learning to accept help without surrendering control, to acknowledge my limitations without letting them define me entirely. It was learning the difference between reasonable caution and paralyzing fear, between protection and imprisonment. Most importantly, it was learning that love sometimes means letting go, trusting the people you care about to make their own mistakes and find their own way through the darkness. Danny had learned to trust me with my own life, and I had learned to trust him with his worry and fear. To understand that his desire to protect me came from the same place as my desire to remain independent, a deep, abiding love that sometimes expressed itself imperfectly, but never stopped trying to do better. On a warm day in late spring, nearly a year after Danny first took my keys, I drove to the Honda dealership on Maple Street. Not to buy anything, but to thank Kevin, the salesman who had been so kind during one of the most difficult times in my life. "Mrs. Henley," he said when he recognized me, "how are you doing? Did you find another car?" I did," I said, gesturing toward my Corolla in the parking lot. "A Toyota this time. But I wanted to thank you for your kindness last year when I sold my Honda. You treated me with dignity when I wasn't feeling very dignified." Kevin looked puzzled, as if he couldn't imagine treating a customer any other way. "I just tried to be helpful. You were more than helpful. You were respectful. You didn't make assumptions about my competence or treat me like I was invisible. That meant more to me than you know." As I drove home from the dealership, I thought about dignity and respect, about the small ways we acknowledge each other's humanity even in the most routine transactions. I thought about the difference between being seen as a problem to be solved and being seen as a person deserving of consideration and choice. The late afternoon sun was streaming through my windshield, and the radio was playing an old song that Harold used to love. Something about taking life one day at a time. I sang along, my voice cracked and imperfect but joyful. And for that moment at least, I felt completely, absolutely myself. When I pulled into my driveway, Danny's truck was parked in its usual spot on the street. He was sitting on my porch again. But this time he was smiling, and I could see Sarah beside him. The girlfriend I'd been hearing about for months but hadn't yet met, Aunt Martha. Danny called as I got out of my car. "I'd like you to meet Sarah." She was younger than I'd expected, with kind eyes and a firm handshake. "Danny's told me so much about you," she said. "He says you make the best chocolate chip cookies in Illinois." "He's biased," I said, "but I do make a decent cookie. Would you like to come in and test his theory?" As we walked toward my front door, Sarah linking her arm through mine in a gesture that felt natural rather than patronizing, I realized that this was what I'd been fighting for all along. Not just the right to drive or make my own decisions, but the right to continue being a person who could offer hospitality and friendship, who could contribute something valuable to the lives of people I cared about. Inside my kitchen, while I mixed cookie dough and Sarah and Danny talked about their plans for the weekend, I felt a deep sense of contentment that had nothing to do with my diagnosis or prognosis. I was exactly where I belonged, doing exactly what I was meant to do, being Aunt Martha. Making cookies, creating a warm place for the people I loved to gather and feel at home. The keys to my car were sitting on the counter beside my purse, where they belonged, where they would stay until the day cameth. It came when I decided for myself that it was time to give them up. But that day wasn't today, and tomorrow was still full of possibilities I couldn't yet imagine. For now, that was enough, more than enough. It was everything. Now, I'm curious about you who have followed my story to the end, okay? Have you ever had someone take away your independence in the name of protecting you? Have you watched family members use your health or age against you as if they were justifications for control? What would you do if the people who claimed to love you most were the ones stripping away your dignity piece by piece? Comment below and let me know what city you're reading from, so I can see how far my story has reached. And remember, getting older doesn't mean getting invisible sometimes. It means getting clearer about what matters and who truly respects your worth. Autonomy after 60 is still autonomy. Dignity at any age is your birthright. Standing up for yourself when family members try to manage your life isn't just possibly essential. I'm living proof that you're never too old to reclaim your keys. And you're never too old to drive toward your own horizon.